The Holy Gospel according to Luke, the 14th chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Now large crowds were traveling with Jesus, and he turned and said to them, "Whoever comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, and even life itself, cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not carry the cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. For which of you, intending to build a tower, does not first sit down and estimate the cost, to see whether he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who see it will begin to ridicule him, saying, 'This fellow began to build and was not able to finish.' Or what king going out to wage war against another king will not sit down first and consider whether he is able with 10,000 to oppose the one who comes against him with 20,000? If he cannot, then while the other is still far away, he sends a delegation and asks for the terms of peace. So therefore, none of you can become my disciple if you do not give up all of your possessions." This is the gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
Please be seated. We do not like to hear harsh words on a Sunday morning, and yet I don't think they get too much more harsh than this. Jesus tells those who are around him they've got to make a choice. Now, why is it that Jesus would do all of this? Well, I want you to consider this, that there were many, many, many people that were around Jesus. In fact, we hear that there were so many that were traveling with him. Why were they traveling with him? Well, they heard about the miracles. Some of them may have even witnessed some of those miracles. Some of those may be part of the thousands who have been fed by those loaves and a few fishes. A lot of them, I believe, were going along because they thought maybe, just maybe, Jesus would do something for them. If not, at least it was entertainment. Maybe they would see another miracle. Maybe he would do something that they hadn't seen before. And so they walked with him. And so Jesus turned to those who were traveling with him. And these are the words. And he said, "I don't want you to travel with me. Rather, I want you to follow me. I want you to be my disciples. But if you choose to be my disciples, it's going to be your decision, and it's a decision that must be made. And if you do choose, you must first count the cost." That's pretty harsh, isn't it? And then Jesus goes on to say, and the cost of it is this, that you must hate your mother and your father. You must hate your wife and your children. You must hate your friends. You must hate even your life. That's hard. This is the Prince of Peace. This is the God of love. And we hear the word hate being used over and over again. We have to understand a few things about this. First of all, that Jesus is speaking in the language that all people would know, either the Hebrew or the Aramaic. We must also know that there are certain expressions that don't translate, because sometimes they don't have the right words. For instance, every time that I was in a race, second place was always first loser. That's harsh, is it not? Well, what happens if we didn't have the word second place? All we had was first loser. That would seem very abrupt. Well, in the time of Jesus, they really didn't have a word for prefer. I don't drink tea, I prefer coffee. In the time of Jesus, I would have to say, I hate tea, I love coffee. There was no either or. It is one or the other. And so when Jesus speaks to us this morning, he is trying to put things in its place. That what he is saying is that God must come first in all things. And if we put God first in all things, that means that everything else and everyone else would be first loser. Again, that seems a little bit harsh even in our language today, but if we put God first in all things, then everything else kind of sorts itself out, doesn't it? That if we entrust all things to God, we know that God is good and that from Him only good things will flow. And that if we truly trust in Him, well, then we know what happens would be to glorify God and not ourselves. And that is where we get hung up a lot. Because let's face it, we like to look good. We like to feel good. We like to think that we are the most important things in our own lives. And yet, we are not. It is God, and God alone. That no, we are not breaking any commandments by hearing Jesus say that you must hate your wife, or you must hate your spouse, or your mother and your father. Even though God's commandment says that we must honor our mother and father, that we must honor and love our spouses, the commandments also say, the first one, if I remember correctly, was love and honor God. And that is what Jesus would command us as well. To love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your mind, with all of your strength, with all of your soul, and love your neighbor as yourself. There's a hierarchy there. God first, and everything else is first loser. It is harsh, but again, if we do those things, then we can trust that all things will indeed end well. We have to consider the cost of following Jesus, and sometimes we have to give up those things that we hold so dearly to, because if we're holding on to things so tightly here on earth, we can't possibly then have our hands or our arms open to receive that which God is blessing us with. We are holding on sometimes to anchors rather than lifting our arms up so that we might be able to fly. We get tied down with things. And yet Jesus says that if you will be my disciple, you will have to make a decision. I shared with Trinity this morning about our journey together, that at one point in our lives, we had something that was almost going to tear us apart. It was something that kind of brought us, well, to some pretty deep discussions. And that was simply this, that I felt a call to be coming into the ministry. And it was interesting because both of us had the same opinion, but we had different ways of getting there. The opinion was this: I didn't want to do it. Her opinion was she didn't want me to do it. And we couldn't agree. Why couldn't we agree? Well, because I was looking from one perspective, she was looking at it from another perspective. My perspective was this. Number one, I had been raised early in church, and we had some really awesome pastors. So much so that they were revered. They were put on pedestals. I didn't belong on a pedestal. I didn't have the knowledge or the abilities nor the love that these people had. So I knew that I didn't belong there. And when you're on a pedestal, it's easier to get knocked off. And if you notice that when I do a message, I move around a lot, that's so nobody can throw anything at me. But when you're on a pedestal or behind a pulpit, you're an easy target. Another reason, more seriously though, is this: that I also had known a number of pastors, being at different churches, that, well, they really didn't seem to be there for the right reasons. That for them it was more a job, a career, something in which they could earn money, and unfortunately they tended to put people secondary. Sometimes I think they put God in last place. So much so that I ended up leaving church for a while because of that influence. And I most certainly didn't want to be a pastor in that mold, so I decided I really didn't intend on being a pastor. Now, Vera came at it from a whole different side, because she always has the right way. She looked at it like this. She says, I don't want Ron to be a pastor. And of course, we never talked about it. We just kind of argued back and forth, never really discussing our true feelings. But she, as it came to be, said, I don't want Ron to be a pastor for the simple fact that I don't want to be a pastor's wife. And once we actually got together and really talked about it, after we had prayed about it first, we began to understand one another better. You see, her vision of a pastor's wife was simply what she had seen all of her life and experienced. That a pastor's wife usually had to have musical ability, because usually they're the ones singing the choir or leading choir or playing the piano. And at the same time, they were the ones that had to teach Sunday school or preschool or be involved with all of the kids' play productions. And she realized that she didn't have those talents. And so she decided that I shouldn't be a pastor because of those reasons. Perfectly sound. And yet here we are. But when we turned this over to God, when we prayed to God, when we finally came to the point of making that decision, once we put God first, once we said, God, whatever your will be, let it be done, then we found out that, well, we had the wrong idea about everything. That when we put God first, things did kind of sort themselves out, because I realized this. I didn't have to be a typical pastor, and she didn't have to be a typical pastor's wife. That I don't have to wear these goofy backward shirts wherever I go. I don't have to wear a cross wherever I am, because think about it, Jesus only wore one once. You see, people came to know Christ, people came to know God by the way that He loved others, by the way that He acted with others, by the way that He interacted with others. It wasn't by what He wore, what He had on Him. It was by the way that He simply loved. And that is what we are called to do, not only Vera and I, but that's what we are all called to do, is to love others as God has loved us. And that is our calling as disciples. And when we do that, we put God first, we put our neighbors next, then we do all of those things to glorify God. And when we do that, that's when everything just begins to happen. And that in glorifying God, we are open to welcoming the strangers. We are open to going to those whose society is kicked to the curb. We go to the prison and we tell people that, yes, you have done something that society says is wrong, but you are also still worthy of love. You are also still worthy of being called a beloved child of God. That if we all looked at ourselves, we would all know that we fall short. That we are all guilty of sin, and we are all convicted by what we have done. But thanks be to God that His grace is greater than all of that. And it is by grace alone that we are saved. That there is nothing that I could ever do, no matter how many sermons I preach, no matter how many people I visit in prison, or in the hospital, or in a nursing home, or in their own homes. No matter how many things that I want to do right, I cannot earn God's salvation. I cannot earn His love. But what I can do is, because He first loved me, I can respond to that love by loving others. That I can realize that those people that I might meet, whom I might want to judge, I have to hold back and say, wait a minute. They're in the same boat I'm in. They've done some wrong things just as I have done wrong things. They have not been loving, nor have I been loving. They have said some wrong things as I have said some wrong things. They have not shown mercy, and there have been days that I have not shown mercy. I cannot condemn them, for I would condemn myself. Because of God's great love, and he loved me on my worst days, then I must love them on their worst days. Now that doesn't mean I have to agree with everyone, but that does mean that God calls me to love everyone. And that hopefully in the way that I love them, sharing with them the reason that I can love them, that because God first loved me, I am then capable of loving them. They might come to understand that this is indeed a God of love, not a God of hate or a God of condemnation. That God is not this traffic cop in the sky that wants to pull us over and nail us for every infraction that we've ever done. Because quite honestly, I'd be off the side of the road every moment of my life. And I think so would the rest of us. But God loves us so much that he was willing to turn his back on heaven itself, come to earth, to live amongst us, and then to die on a cross so that we might be made right again with God. And in doing so, we have been given life eternal in his name. Is that not something we should be sharing with others? You see, that is what we are called to do and be as disciples of Jesus Christ. To share this good news. And yet, there are times that I must confess that that's the farthest thing from my mind. Because sometimes it's hard. Sometimes people don't want to hear it. And yes, sometimes it's cost me some friendships. Sometimes people will turn when they see me rather than to even say hello. And it hurts. But what hurts most is that I may never see them in God's kingdom. And that's a pain that doesn't go away. And so even for those people who would turn from me because of what I believe, I will still pray for them and I will ask God to open their hearts and their minds, not for my sake, but for their sake. So they might come to know what I know. They might come to experience the love that I experience. And that the mercy and grace of God might open to them a new way. This discipleship thing is expensive. You know, we live in a country where things are relatively peaceful, even though we have these horrific headlines. But I want us to understand that there are places in this world, some places that are communist or were communist, some places that are, well, they live in a theocracy, and most of the time it is under control of Muslims. And that where people are trying to spread the good news of Jesus Christ, they are imprisoned, they are tortured, and they are put to death for doing just that. And yet, there are those people, those disciples who rise up, and even at the cost of their own lives, they are willing to go and proclaim, to do the things that sometimes we are afraid to do. They are willing to say that, yes, they believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, and that only by believing in him can we know God, and by believing in him, we shall have life eternal. And they are willing to bet their lives on that. Are we willing to do the same? So Jesus asks us to come and follow him, like he asked those fishermen, like he asked those tax collectors. And they, as we hear in Scripture, immediately left their boats, immediately left the place they were at, and they followed him. And that's a great story. It's easy to read. It's easy to hear. But it's so hard to live, is it not? To drop everything and follow Jesus. But when you do, I will guarantee you one thing. It will be worth it. Not just for the here and now, but for the treasures that you will build up in heaven. Not because you can ever earn God's love, that is already given. but by sharing that love. There, Jesus says, your treasures will increase in heaven. Count the cost, but more importantly, take the chance.